My physical pain was actually a manifestation of unpacked emotional pain. I just didn't realize it. My body is still, by definition and by science, broken. Yet I have not lived with pain for over 2 years. And that's not just a choice. It's not me shutting it off. I still get sore. I still have mornings that I wake up after working out and I feel it. I'll have occasional days that I'm tense or my body's having a trauma response and I'll be more tense and I have to force it to release. But the reality of it is I largely live without pain anymore. And a lot of this comes through this shift from fighting to surrendering. And this is even the difference between doing and being. The more I can be, the more I am.
Let's talk about change. The truth is, nothing changes unless you change. And if you want to step into your full potential, you need to surround yourself with the right people. That is exactly why I have created the InPowered Life community. Within this community, I'm going to be teaching you the exact same mindset and energy practices that I have taught my clients that are paying me well over 6 figures, including CEO owners of billion-dollar organizations and professionals at the very top of their fields. You're going to get access to 2 live virtual calls every single month with me, where we're going to dive into mindset, energy practices, spiritual principles that are going to help you thrive in every area of your life. Can't make a call? No worries. We're going to provide you with a recording so that you can catch up anytime. Plus, you're going to have the opportunity for direct coaching from me and to learn from incredible guest speakers who are going to share their best practices and growth. Remember, you become the people that you spend the most time with. So why not spend time within a community that is going to elevate you and your life? For an introductory $499, you're going to get a full year of support and coaching alongside high performers who are committed to expanding their careers, their growth, their finances, and to elevate their overall quality of life. Just click the link in the show notes or log into rudyrixteens.com to lock in your spot and start your transformation today. Welcome to the Empowered Life podcast, a space dedicated to spreading the message that you have the power within to create everything you seek.
So if you're ready to enroll in a new kind of higher learning, the kind that leads to true personal freedom, then hang here with us.
We're your hosts, Rudi and Aniston Rixteens, and this is the Empowered Life. Welcome to the Empowered Life podcast. My name is Rudi Rixteens. I'm your host, and today we are joined by a very, very dear friend of mine. His name is Brian Bogert, and interestingly enough, he and I are newly formed friends, but he has become such an incredible person in my life. In fact, about 3 weeks ago, I get a text message from him that just says, "Man, we've just met, and yet I think about you so often." He's like, "Man, I'm looking forward to pouring into this friendship, into the relationship, and getting to know each other." And right before we hit record, he says, "Man, I'm so grateful for the time to be here today so we can further our relationship and the impact we're going to create out and in the world." Brian is a transformational speaker. He's a business strategist. He's a coach. He is a disruptor of patterns of who people were so that they can shift into the inner power and knowing of who they came here to be. He's also the host of Flipping the Lid podcast, which is one of the top podcasts in self-development. And more than anything, he is literally an extension of my mind. Every conversation that we have is so aligned. You, right now, the audience, are listening to the InPowered Life podcast, where we believe the power lies within to live, to have, and to be, and to achieve anything and everything that your heart desires. And this man literally believes that everything comes from the inside. It's not about doing, but rather about being who you are. I'm so excited to welcome him to the InPowered Life podcast. Brian, thank you for coming. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing space with us. And more than anything, brother, thank you for your friendship.
Man, thank you for having me here. And thank you for your heart for impact and leading and for building an awesome platform that you and I get to have some fun together on to help create a little bit more ripple effect, man. Yeah, it's instant. But, it also started our relationship with you coming over and I think saying something to the effect of anybody who wears Chuck Taylors is a friend of mine. And that kind of grounded us right in the moment, even like where our feet were. And then we just jammed for 15 minutes on kids and life and being dads and all of the above. And I just so appreciate when I can interact with somebody and we're immediately into the real, right? We're immediately into the depth, because anything that lacks surface doesn't really interest me. And I'm not a big, believer or wanting to just have surface level conversations with people when I meet them. So when I can instantly vibrate, instantly operate at a frequency with people that it's like, yep, okay, this is real. I know it's the beginning of something pretty special, and you and I are still exploring what that looks like.
I just want to anchor for our audience. You use the words vibrate, energy, deep, meaningful. Like those are all my love language words, man. I am not a superficial. How are you? What's going on? Weather's great kind of guy. I'm like, how's your marriage? I talk about that so often on the podcast. That life really is about getting to know someone, and through the connection with people, through sharing moments, through having vulnerability, that's where we truly get to know someone. But more than anything, through them as the mirror, we get to know ourselves. And I challenge you as the listener, as you hear these words, this conversation, how could you deepen the relationships that you have, so that not only can you see the person that you're communing with, but that you could see yourself through them. Brian, I want to go back and start at the very beginning of your story. I know that you have been sharing the story for what is about, 24, 25 years now.
33, 33, bro.
30, 33?
33 this year. Yeah.
33. My apologies.
No, it's
33
okay.
years.
Nothing to apologize for. I just wanted to ground that real quick because it's like, man, I can't believe it's been 33 years either.
That is insane. That is
Yeah.
insane. So, for the benefit of the listener, I want to take them back to what I believe was 1994. You had gone into Walmart to go and pick up a single paintbrush, and you and your family left. And as you're standing in the parking lot waiting for your mother to open the car door, you get struck by a truck, and your left arm gets completely severed from your body. 24 surgeries later, countless hours of rehab and rehabilitation to, be able to have mobility and movement back in your arm. One of the most, I would say, grueling experiences for anybody, let alone for a 7-year-old boy who is just starting life. I'd like to start from the very beginning and really just ask you, having an experience like that, how has that defined you as a man? Because I believe that everything that has ever happened to us is always preparing us for who we get to become. I've met you as the man who is creating tremendous impact in the world, who knows who he is. He is confident in his own skin, but it couldn't always have been that way. So, what has that journey been like for you?
Man, it's been a long one, and we're gonna hit the tops of the waves at different points. The first thing that I want to highlight, though, is in the kind of highlight of this story. First, I'll show everybody who's watching this from a video perspective, so you can see. Right? Yes, the truck ran over me diagonally, tore my spleen, left a tag track scar on my stomach, but it severed my left arm completely from my body. Um, how's it shaped me, man? It's what's interesting is that anybody who knew me pre-accident, in fact, my second grade teacher, right after the injury, said to my mom, she said, "I think Brian had a brush with death, and it made him, have this vigor for life. He's trying to take over the world." And she laughed, and she was like, "That's always been Brian, right?" And what do I mean by that? There are elements of me that always had huge, huge energy, huge personality. I was speaking in full sentences at 18 months. My dad, I told to take off my training wheels on my bike when I was 2.5 on one of those little 12-inch bikes. I couldn't even put my feet on the ground, so I had to crash to stop it, but I rode it. I've always been one that has set my mind on things and done them. I don't say that in any way with any kind of ego at all. In fact, I think that more than anything, what this accident did for me was ground me in perspective. See, I was the type that things always came easy for, but I've also always been the type that, my brother used to call my daughter an all terrain vehicle, right? Because she literally, from the day she's been born, has just rolled over anything that's coming her way, right? And that's kind of been a little bit me as well. What it did was ground me, though, because I do remember laying in that hospital bed for the very first time, feeling sorry for myself at 7, wondering what was going to happen to me. And then we're being overwhelmed with support from other families in the ICU saying, "We're so sorry for what happened to you. We're so sorry for what happened to you. What can we do to help you?" And then we come to find out that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me with a terminal illness, and they don't know if they're going to live for another 30 days. My life was secure at that point. My arm was secondary. And so this was one of those times that I learned that both pain and perspective point us towards what's important if we're paying attention. And it's also the time and the decision in my life that I decided to no longer get stuck by the things that have happened to me, but instead get moved by what I can do with them. And that drives a lot of what I do today, which is move people, move people. But what I also want to ground for everybody is, yes, my story is highly unique. But every single one of you who's listening right now, you also have highly unique stories. Whether it's a big T or a little t trauma, whether it's getting run over by a truck, whether it's divorce, whether it's financial loss, whether it's how your dad looked at you when you loaded the dishwasher incorrectly when you were 8. If it created an emotion, if it created a belief system that has a pattern that your life has only further validated, then guess what? You were impacted by your stories. And what becomes important is, how do you pause long enough to become aware of the lessons you can create from your own stories, so you become intentional in how you can start living through them moving forward. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to live and tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. And so at this point in my life, my reason for existence is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. Okay, but there's a lot that got shaped into this. And I'll start with just the very beginning piece, because this was the elements that, regardless of performance, regardless of outcomes, regardless of how I live my life today, can ground in reality, because there were things that happened in the first year right after the injury that shaped belief systems for me for 20 to 25 years that I didn't realize. Right? I came out of the hospital and I had a teddy bear in between my arm. My arm had to heal at 90 degrees, and I was already cute, already have this gravity towards my energy. And so, of course, as this cute 7-year-old, everybody's coming up, what happened to you? What happened to you? What happened to you? They're expecting me to say, man, I was running, I jumped off the jungle gym. I flew off the swings. I was racing my brother on my bike and crashed. They were expecting all those normal answers. And I would look them deadpan in the eye and say I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. I'm going to pause for 1 second, because the first piece of what shaped and conditioned me is that not everybody even asked that. Most people just stared. And I've said for years that I'm only as good as my questions. And in fact, questions to me are the only way we create options and opportunities in our lives. It's the only way we create movement, because the only time we get stuck, the only time there's waste in our lives is when we stop asking questions. But when we don't ask questions of others and we just stare, what are we doing? We're writing their story for them. Right? So when people just stared, they're making assumptions. They're writing those narratives. And I just wished they would have just asked me a question. The ones that did, I answered just the way I told you. But then here would be the couple things that would follow that. After they picked up their jaw off the floor, because most didn't even expect half of what was coming, they'd pause and they'd turn to look at my parents for validation, which told me what? They didn't even believe me. They didn't believe my truth that I'm living and existing in, that I'm wearing on my body, that I am authentically and congruently communicating the exact truth for what happened. So most people wouldn't even ask. Then the ones that didn't believe me. And then most of them would view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately telling me all the things I was and wasn't going to be able to do. Immediately filtering and shaping who I'm going to be and what I'm going to be able to accomplish. And I don't know about any of you listening, but I've had this visceral reaction from day one that when someone tells me what I can or can't do, or what I'm going to or going to not do, I am going to guarantee that's not the truth. Now, I no longer have to prove that anymore. But the third thing that would happen in this situation is, after they would finally accept the truth, after they would finally start to view me a little bit through whatever narrative I gave, the immediate response was always, so what were you doing running through the road? They immediately assumed it was my fault. Now, all of a sudden, I'm being stared at, right? Which no one likes. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to protect that. My narrative's being written for me. Then even when I get asked, they don't believe me and they start limiting me through all the lenses of what I'm going to do. And then lastly, the assumption is immediately that it's my fault. Now, I don't know what it's like to be transgender. I don't know what it's like to be a man or a woman of color. I don't know what it's like to be gay. I don't know what it's like to be so many other things, but I do know what it's like to be the only one in every room I walk into. I do know what it's like to be overlooked, completely dismissed, have my narratives written for me, all the defined elements of who I was and wasn't going to be, all based on what people saw and whatever they were able to actually see within me and whatever they'd be capable of. And I know that every single human has felt that. Every single human has felt the layers of disconnection that have shaped us. And guess what I did in that period of time? I created a really strong mental narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And that served me really well for a long time, but it's only a part of the equation. I'm going to pause because I know we're going to unpack different portions of this, Rudi, but like how it shaped me, it shaped every way that I viewed myself for 20 to 25 years that weren't actually accurate, that were not my standards, that were not my belief systems. They were the ones I adopted to protect myself, or they were the ones that I adopted because it was easier to live inside the box of who the world told me who to be instead of who I really was.
Hey, it's Aniston Ricksteins here, and I want to ask you, have you ever wondered if there's more to your life and work than what you're doing right now? What if I told you that the universe is hiring and you were born to fill a role that will bring you true purpose and success? In my new number one best-selling book, The Universe is Hiring, Discover the Role You Were Born to Fill, I'm going to show you exactly how to step into that role. This isn't just a book full of inspiration. It's a roadmap to help you start shifting into a more fulfilling life right now. You'll get clear on your unique purpose, learn how to align with your strengths, and take actionable steps towards the career and life that truly light you up. If you're ready to make a change and start living the life you were meant for, grab your copy today. Available anywhere you buy your books online or click the link in the show notes.
So I want to unpack that for sure, because under the age of 7, the human brain is absorbing all information as a fact, and we are receiving instruction first through whatever's happening in our external world, and then chemically as we process thoughts and then feelings. And you just started today by saying everybody has trauma, big or little. It could be your dad, the way that he looked at you unpacking the dishwasher when you were 8. That was the example that you gave. And then that would be maybe the child processing, my dad doesn't love me, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or whatever that is. And that's one incident. But you're talking about a 7-year-old boy who has his arm severed from his body, has to have it reattached, removing muscles from your lats to your arms, veins from your legs to just incredulous, arduous process of rebuilding your arm and your body to save your life. And then having people not make eye contact with you or not ask you a question, not look at you as a person, then when you do speak, not believe you. So there's not one trigger, there's not one trauma. It's again and again and again and again and again. And then you said, I created a narrative, Brian is strong. And you went on, a rampage of the things that you would say. You created this facade. I would love to know, was there a moment that created that shift where Brian said, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but where Brian decided in that moment, okay, you know what, I'm going to just pretend to be strong, or I'm just choosing to be strong, or I acknowledge I'm strong. Because to have all of that external validation coming in when you don't have the ability to process with logic and reason, you're now just reacting and responding. To not allow that to be completely debilitating, but instead it created a super personality that really catapulted you. What was that moment like? Or was it a string of moments? Or was it a journey that moved you from being the victim to the victor?
That's a really good question. Um, and I would tell you I'm still on the journey. So even though I shifted a lot in that moment, I would tell you that there are still pieces, and I'm turning 40 this year, 33 years later, that I'm still on the journey of trying to step into a place of conscious awareness so that I can unwind and reprogram. I will tell you there were lots of moments though, right? Lots of moments. And I want to honor you because in the very beginning of this call, before we even jumped on, you said, hey, how can I best honor you? How can I best support you? And I said, ask really good questions. No one's asked me what you just asked me. I don't think ever. Right. And I think that that's actually really powerful because in those early years, there was a lot that I was blind to, Rudy. And there were a lot of things that may not have been as conscious of a choice as I communicate them to be today. Meaning, I was in the journey, but I was also living in this new identity that was associated with pain. And we're talking like really insane levels of pain, right? Like the my pain tolerance at this point is so high that it is shocking for some people what I'm able to tolerate. Right? And the reason I highlight that is because pain was a motivator, pain was an identity, pain was truly even used in some ways to perform because I, like a lot of other people that have operated as high performers or who have elements of shame in their life, learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. Right now, this is not deeply ingrained just because of who my parents are, but all of the factors that shaped it. There was a moment in the hospital, for example, that is interesting because my brother went into therapy, talk therapy, very early because of what he witnessed and what he saw and how much he struggled. And I asked my mom not long ago, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I said, why was I never put in a position to talk to anybody? She said, because nobody thought you needed it. Right? Like you were so clear, so centered, like so strong, so no one thought you needed it. But this moment I point to in the hospital in the very first 2 weeks when I'm being prodded, I mean, 5 or 6 surgeries in those first few weeks, like not knowing if I'm going to be able to even go home with an arm at that moment. And when I did go home with an arm, I went home without skin on my arm because it was too swollen for them to even start attempting to do skin grafts. Right. So I had open muscle on my arm when I went home. But in those first 2 weeks, I took a doll. I was working with a child life therapist. And a child life therapist, for those who don't know what they are kind of an intermediary between the family and the medical staff, whether at hospitals or in physicians' offices, that help with the social emotional components of healing, but they also help with transition of care to the home and communicating as an intermediary. She gives me this doll. She gives me casting material. This is in the first 2 weeks. I wrapped the entire doll, head to toe, in casting material. Not a single spot open. Now, if you understand early childhood development, you understand psychology, you understand what that symbolizes, it's like, I need somebody to protect me. I don't want to be poked and prodded anymore. Like I'm in overwhelm in this environment. I'm living in this crazy amount of pain. I'm not ever being left to even rest. I'm doctors coming in and out for weeks, right? Nonstop. And what I need is not only to rest, but I need to be a kid too. Right. And so why I highlight that is that's even what she attempted to do. She said, this guy needs a break. But what it equated to was like a half a day of rest amidst all this. Right. There were times when I would be sitting on my bed, and I want to be really clear when I say this. I don't mean anything to be disrespectful or dishonoring to my parents in anything that I represent, because I am unbelievably loyal to them, right? For all that they sacrificed. But I've watched home videos. I mean, I grew up in the 80s and 90s, right? My dad had one of those big old VHS, and they documented everything. I've got footage from all of these things, therapy and dressing changes. And we're talking the amount of pain that as a 7-year-old, when they would do a dressing change, I would scream at the top of my lungs. And we had neighbors 4 and 5 houses down that could hear me screaming. Right. The whole like street knew what was happening and all of the attention was on me, but I also didn't want it on me. But I have video where, are you familiar with what phantom pains are? Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, so not everybody, back in the 90s, not everybody knew what this was, and still a lot of people don't. But phantom pain is, for those who don't know, where your brain has not completely caught up and rewired. So people could lose a limb, you could be paralyzed in sense, but yet you'll still in your brain associate pain like in your fingertips or in your hand, right? To the point of not being believed and having to just be tough and deal with the pain. There was a dressing change that took place in the first 2 days of me coming home, and I was telling my dad how much it hurt. He said, where does it hurt? Well, my fingers, my hand on my left side. The nerves had not been reattached at this point. There was no legitimate reason why, in our normal brains and how we're taught how our bodies work, that I would know that I would be in physical pain in my hand when the nerves aren't even attached. But what did my dad say? That's impossible. It can't hurt. You don't have nerves. Again, it's a micro moment. But what did that do for me? I can't complain about my pain. Right? I can't honor my pain because even though I'm the one in my body telling my dad what's happening to me, because the nerves aren't attached, they're telling me that my reality isn't real. And again, these are just examples of micro moments because I referenced the dishwasher, but it's no different in my world. There were micro moments that shifted these beliefs, that shifted how I would show up. But I was very clear very early, and this was probably in the first 6 months. I didn't want anybody else writing my story for me. And so it was a choice. It was a choice to bury the pain, live with the pain, become a practitioner of pain, use pain as pride, as motivation, as purpose, as drive. Because if Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And despite whatever physical limitations I might have, despite whatever pain I'm in, if I can go out and still perform and shock people, if I can rattle their minds, if I can blow their minds when I go play sports and everybody's overlooking me, not assuming that I'm going to do it, and I end up being one of the best athletes on the field, right? Like, not only does that give me that validation in those moments, but then it's all the praise of like all the shock and awe of what I could actually do. When in reality, if my arm had never been removed, nobody would be celebrating. And to my point of being grounded before, everything physically came easy to me. So I probably would have still been the best athlete. I just would have been an arrogant asshole about it. And so there were micro moments. And I would say that the first 6 months was the beginning of where I decided. And then that just became more and more and more my identity the more I lived it. And the more I went down this path, and the more I got teased, the more I got overlooked, the more I associated better with adults than my peers, the more you name it, I figured out what I needed to do to show up and feel safe in the world, despite the fact that my own parents didn't even know how much I was suffering inside.
So I have to interject there with a question for the benefit of the audience because I love the idea of unpacking one story for the benefit of everybody. You just said you wanted to no longer allow somebody else to write your story. But if we really break it down, you were allowing people to write your story by not being able to say, actually, I'm in pain. I just want to be held. I'm having a moment. Instead of saying, I'm going to be tough, you're being what you expect people want you to be, which proved you to be very successful. But now I want the audience to think about where have their triggers and traumas, where they have overcompensated, built the buffer of personality, time, and space so that they can show up differently. I would love to know, how did that negatively impact you in your adult life? Because that would have to have ripple effects.
Yeah. And I mean, you're spot on, Rudy. And I'm really happy that you called attention to that with the nuance that you did, because I often operate through the lens of the choices I was making in the moment versus what I know now. Right? Which is exactly what you just articulated. Again, that's why I said earlier, it's like it was easier for me to live inside the box of who the world wanted me to be instead of actually live based on who I was. But at the same time, I was protecting myself in a way that I believed I was writing my own narrative. And in fact, I was just living within the direction that everybody was shaped. And by the way, I would say this is true for many people. First moment that it really caught me off guard and really caused me to slow down, I was 20. I was snowboarding. I was out in Southern California, was with some friends, and I went down, and I knew immediately that my arm was broken. It rebroke in the same spot that my left arm came off at originally. It was a compound fracture. I was a good enough snowboarder that it. I normally would just wrap my arms in, dig the edge, and pop right back up. I knew instantly it was different. I could feel it pop. I'll compress this story because it ultimately led to 10 months with my arm hanging by my side. I went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice. Compound fractures have a normal procedure in most hospitals. They did not follow any of those procedures because they were afraid of them. I went through 5 or 6 different alternative treatments that had the physiology of my left arm been normal, they probably would have worked, but they didn't take that into account despite the fact that I told them that that was the case. But here's what happened. Now all of a sudden I've been living my life in that strong narrative. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. And now I'm completely alone. I'd been surrounded by all these people that I had been pouring into, helping people in college, people in my brotherhood, good friends, helping, helping, helping. And no one was there for me. Now I'm also living as a 20-year-old independently. And I had taken for granted all the support that I actually had in my home because I forgot that I had to relearn now at 20 that I lived for a long time knowing how to button my pants with one hand, being able to tie my shoes with one hand, being able to do things that I had taken for granted as I got function back into my left arm. All of a sudden, I'm now living in an independent way without anyone there to support me. And I got really depressed and I got really angry and I got really resentful. And then I had to surrender the truth, which is that the world just was operating based on the narrative I'd been projecting. The one they'd added that I didn't know about until later was on top of Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself. They also said Brian will ask for help if he needs it. I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't have the courage to ask for help in one of my most vulnerable periods of my adult life. And that's when I leaned into vulnerability and authenticity that I, at that time, defined as the glue that bound human connection. But here's what also really happened. I was in seek of who. I didn't have a healthy model for it. So I chased what? What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success? Because again, I'm still living in this way. But what I got really good at was sharing just enough about my own story, asking just enough good questions to get other people to lower their armor so I could drive a Mack truck through and focus on their problems instead of my own still. By 27, I had a $10 million business. It was growing. It was amazing. But ultimately, I found myself in a position where I had all the what's in the world I ever wanted, but it cost me who I was. My bank account was full, but I found myself empty. And that was the beginning of the path to repair. Hired my first coach at that time, started to raise levels of awareness and intentionality, but it was all still really through a mental performance component. I never believed that. My wife used to joke for years that I was sympathetic, not empathetic. And I was like inside, like feeling everything so gloriously, but I may not have expressed it externally. And yet I also didn't quite know what I was really feeling. It was 5 years into this journey of healing. And it was 32 years old when I had a moment on the couch with my daughter that changed everything. We're laughing, we're playing, we're having fun. And she wraps her arm around my neck and she kisses me on the cheek. She was 2 at the time. And she says, Dad, I love you. And I just broke down in tears. What I want to be clear on is that I think that men crying is a sign of strength. True strength actually hides behind vulnerability. But I also learned how to shut off tears a long time ago. And I still, at almost 40, after years of knowing this, am relearning to connect to tears. They are a beautiful release. They're this. But what in that moment it told me was I'm crying in joy, which I'd never experienced before. And if I'm feeling this emotion as profoundly and as strongly as I am, it also made me realize how pale in comparison everything else I'd been feeling my entire life actually was. And so that's when I realized that I had been unconsciously, but actively suppressing pretty much everything I was feeling in every way. And that's when I had to sit with long enough and actually unpack the truth that when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, also when I chose to shut off mental pain, emotional pain, and spiritual pain for 25 years, I just didn't realize it. Human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. And it's led to a whole variety of things that have shifted since then. But I know we'll talk about more even shift moments. I almost lost everything and everyone in my entire life at age 35 after I've already been on this track of development because of moments that I was still blind to. And so all I'm trying to help people recognize and realize is that if we're not afraid to do the work, we're not afraid to find the truth behind all the trash from our past that has caused us to believe all these things. If we can recognize that the trash from our past is not our fault, it just becomes our responsibility once we become aware of it or we start bearing others in ours. And we can live objectively and non judgmentally with ourselves, not to just ask those perpetual, never ending questions of why that just raise our level of awareness to a point where we're just more aware of why we should be judging ourselves, but instead knowing what to do about it. We actually can create the freedom from our lives if we really dig and unpack to the point of finding the truth. Now, you hinted at it earlier, Rudy. Oftentimes, our trash and our treasure are formed in the same moments. Yes, I benefited greatly because of a lot of the ways that I lived my life for a long time, thinking that I was writing my own story, but really living in a way that I was just proving it to myself and proving it to others, having to justify, defend, and validate anything about myself because again, I had never been believed and everybody thought it was my fault. So I'm living in this highly protective but disconnected state for years of my life, despite the fact that I have all this external success. You know, I believed that if I'd built a life of significance, a life of prominence, a life of impact, maybe people would just want to be around me. That's what I unpacked at 27, that I've now been for 13 years, getting more and more and more clear on. And though I've done a ton of work and I'm in a completely different place today, what I also know is there is no final destination, just constant evolution of self. And so, as far along as I am, I'm just trying to pull as many along with me because I think what we all want is freedom, right? Freedom in some sense or some way. And freedom, true freedom, only comes when we can clear the interference that causes us to protect ourselves in ways that we don't even realize. And freedom comes in the ways that we no longer have anything to justify, protect, or defend to the world because that's when we get to be exactly who we are with no need to be anything other.
I love that analogy. I want to add to it by saying that I believe that we are all seeking freedom, and the only way to achieve true freedom is to give selflessly of ourselves every day in every single way. And the only way to do that is to have those vulnerable, meaningful moments with people. You know, every experience is always adding to the collective of who we are, who we get to become. I have a really deep question I want to get to, but I'm just going to ask like an opening to that. Do you believe that if you were not struck by that truck in the parking lot, severed arm, 24 surgeries later, again having all these surgeries and treatments in your 20s, again, 35, almost losing it, like all these compounded moments, do you believe if you didn't have that experience at 7 that you would be a coach today? Would you have been on a completely different path and trajectory?
Yeah, not a chance. I don't think I would have been at all. Um, I'm 100% positive that I would not be who I am today if it was not for what happened to me. I let me say it differently. I would be exactly who I am, but I probably would be living incongruently and living in a place of not really having perspective, not really operating in a way that I could see beyond the tip of my own nose. When things come so easy to people, and I don't mean to make this political, I don't mean to make this anything other than how I'm intending it for myself. So I'm going to just ask people to not let the lesson get lost in the language. Um, when things come easy, we don't look at that as privilege, but it is. It's a gift, right? And many people don't recognize the responsibility that's associated with that privilege. And it's like that saying from Spider-Man, right? To whom much is given, much is expected. What I'll acknowledge is like, I don't think I would have gone to the college that I went to. I don't think I would have met the wife that I did. I don't think I would have taken the career path that I did originally. I don't think I would have done or had the same level of impact in philanthropy, of which I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars at this point, right? To impact others and organizations. Like, there's so many things that I guarantee physically and intellectually, things would have come so easy, like they always had to me. And seemingly like people believe is to me today. It's just through a totally different lens, and I don't think that I would have had the perspective to ground me. And I would be chasing ego. I would be chasing outcomes. I would be chasing all the things that people like that with privilege haven't been forced into a place of perspective to recognize the need for other elements. And I wouldn't change it for a second. I wouldn't change anything about what's taken place to me. And in fact, at this point in my life, like, I don't view even current moments of resistance as I'm being tested. Right? I see it rather through the lens of I'm being protected and promoted. I just don't know how yet. Right? I know that everything happens for a reason and for cause, no matter how challenging it can be. And so, what do I try to do at this point in my life? Remove as much of the resistance and create as much alignment and congruence in every way I possibly can. That's all I can do consciously. Right? And if I can do that as consciously as possible, then I'm consistently refining to that place of freedom. Outside of that, I'm living in the, for lack of a better term, the matrix that so many others are not ever knocked out of. Right? I think that truck knocked me out of the matrix, and it just took me a long time to realize that.
I believe that had you not been struck by the truck, you would be the version of you today, but with just a different level of awareness or understanding because something else would come up. And I do believe that we're always being prepared and qualified. And I love the analogy of we're constantly being promoted. There's like this next level, there's this thing that we get to. And if we're not learning the lesson will continue to come around until we pay attention. I want to touch on something because I would imagine the audience listening to this, assuming that they have not been following you for years, which I would imagine the majority already will be. If somebody's heard you for the first time and they're listening to the conversation, you mentioned more times that I could count living in excruciating pain. You have a very deep lived understanding of physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, and the majority of people are buried by pain. And I would love to know, what was your advice having navigated a childhood that was riddled with all versions of pain, not just the physical pain of the arm. And if somebody right now is living in a state of pain, how could you support them to view it differently so that they can rewrite their story or their narrative or take a different step?
Rudy, that's a very, very good question. It's more than good. It's intuitive and points exactly towards what matters. To clarify and to start, I want people to understand the level of pain before I give the answer. This is not to pat myself on the back. This is actually to tell a complete story so that you can all see it for what it is. My pain for 31 years was advancing, was getting worse. To your point, right? I don't have a lat on the left side of my back. I don't have a tricep. There's imbalance in my body. I have a curve in my spine. But on top of all of that, I lived my life often having to push the limits of death just to feel alive. And then I also, living through all of this, did a lot of damage to my body trying to prove things to people that, or to myself, through all of what I talked about before. You've met me. I'm not a giant guy by any means. I'm very average. I'm probably 5'11 or 6 foot. I'm like 180, 885 pounds on average, but I have deadlifted 400 pounds. Why would I never ever need to deadlift 400 pounds? Right? All it did was create more damage. I've got herniated discs. I've got like my AC joint is shot on my right side because I've lived primarily on the right side for years. I say all this because the last 10 years of the pain, it was getting to a point where it was quality of life impacting, debilitating. 2 to 3 hours a day minimum to get myself through my body work, my morning routine, just to get myself moving because I would wake up stiff as a board and in so much pain. It was a choice every day to not live on the couch. Okay. Now, we can talk either further later or another show or another time because this is where my concept of embracing pain to avoid suffering came from. It was really deeply embedded. But the question you asked isn't wrapped in that answer. There was a moment 3 years ago, 4 years ago, somewhere in there, where there was a very conscious understanding and acceptance of the role pain played in my life and how self perpetuating it was becoming. It was genuinely done through the lens of fighting it. Fighting, 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 fighting to be heard, fighting to be seen, fighting the pain, fighting all of it. The shift came when I recognized the value of surrender. Now, there's a lot more that's going to go into this answer that, again, we won't have time to cover today. But what do I mean by this? I was fighting my entire life. What does fighting do? It forces a side, it forces an outcome. Why do we live in such a divisive world right now? Because 90% of the world's stuck between anger and fear. And they believe that if they live within one camp, then they're going to be okay as long as they're aligned with the people that are like them. But that's what forces the black and the white nature in everything that we're seeing in today's world. Whereas you and I both know that the gift is actually often in the gray area. So what does fighting do? If we think of a clock, right? It's like that pendulum swinging. It forces to one side or the other because we're either winning the fight or we're losing the fight. But when we're in a place of surrender, it's a completely different mentality, right? It's actually living in a way that we no longer need to justify, protect, defend, or fight for anything. But if we need to fight, we know how and we will. And so I want you all to understand, and I'm going to answer the question a little bit more clearly, that the 33rd anniversary of the injury is coming up, but I lived in daily physical pain for 31 years. And I've now been 2 years and 2 months with zero physical pain. Everybody says, Brian, what did you do? Brian, what did you do? There's a healing modality out there. I've done it. You name it, I've probably done it. I have invested so much time, energy, and money in healing in alternative modalities, traditional modalities, technology, advancements, plant-based medicine, you name it, I've done it. None of it got me out of pain. What got me out of pain was getting myself to live in the deepest level of alignment and the deepest level of healing I'd ever accomplished in my life. My physical pain was actually a manifestation of unpacked emotional pain. I just didn't realize it. My body is still, by definition and by science, broken. Yet I have not lived with pain for over 2 years. Right? And that's not just a choice. It's not me shutting it off. I still get sore. I still have mornings that I wake up after working out and I feel it. I'll have occasional days that I'm tense or my body's having a trauma response and I'll be more tense and I have to force it to release. But the reality of it is I largely live without pain anymore. And a lot of this comes through this shift from fighting to surrendering. And this is even the difference between doing and being. The more I can be, the more I am. But there's a lot that goes into this. It's within our waste to wealth framework. It's in the tools that I've taught people to help actually identify and get to the source or sources so that we can heal the majority of the pain that's causing us to react in the first place. But if we look at pain or we look at any of these other things, what do we all seek and desire as humans? Four things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected, and those are not the same thing. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected. But the second we don't feel seen, understood, and connected, the second we don't feel safe and protected, what do? We tend to protect ourselves. No different than all the narratives, all the things I've talked about throughout this entire conversation so far. But it could be walking into a networking event where everybody wants something from you instead of for you. Handing out business cards and you just feel yucky there. It could be going back to your family's house for the holidays and your aunt, your dad, and your grandma look at you a certain way, and weeks out, you know you're going to feel like shit and you already start anticipating it and that armor goes up. You're planning and protecting. How am I going to get around this? It could be because you don't want to admit the amount of pain that you're operating in, or you want to just put on that tough face because you've been told, because life has told us this, that performance matters, outcomes matter. So you push through and push down, no matter the kind of pain. You push through and you push down, which is only compounding that pain. And it's not actually leading to a healed relationship with the pain. It's actually a codependent relationship with it. But if we imagine protecting ourselves, it's like that 35-gallon black trash bag. If you open one up and you leave it flat, don't open it, put air inside like you put it in the can, just hold it flat. That's now your armor. Now the question becomes, how could you properly expect anybody to see who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your intent, your soul, your boundaries, your desires, your value, your worth, delivered through that opaque force field? And that assumes that they're not carrying their own, that's going to further dilute the message. But when we're fighting against pain, or we're fighting against shame, or we're fighting against anything externally, we're living in that protective state. And the second that armor goes up, we guarantee a couple things. The second you protect, you guarantee you will disconnect from the two things you want most, which is to be seen and understood and connected at the deepest level. The second you protect, you guarantee you will disconnect from who you are and what you want in this world. But if you imagine that we can all put ourselves into this place of surrender in any room, it's like this idea that we become the thermostat instead of the thermometer. You can become the protector and the connector. What does that mean? I can walk into any environment and I can lower my own armor that's causing me to disconnect from the room, and I can wrap a layer of protection energetically. I just almost threw my cup, but I caught it midair. Whew, that was good reflexes. I feel good about that Spider-Man reference earlier now. Anyway, when you walk into that room, right, and you choose, I'm going to wrap this layer of protection around everybody so that everybody gets all four things they want. But what is required to do that? Well, we can, one, choose in a moment to fabricate and lower our armor because we've convinced ourselves we're safe and we don't need to protect. That's the short-term solution, but it takes more energy over time. The long-term solution is actually heal the wounds and the pains underneath that are causing you to still protect in the first place. That doesn't mean that your cells won't still activate once they're healed, once you've seen it, once you've worked through it, but now you have a chance to reprogram it. So when we can live in this place of being a protector and connector, the long term is to heal, do the unpacking work. But that gives us what I call a strong spine and a soft front. A strong spine is I know who I am. I know what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, my heart, my intent, my soul, my desires, my boundaries, my value, my worth, which means I can walk into any environment and be unwavering. Nothing to prove, justify, protect, or defend. Have you seen the movie 8 Mile, Rudi? You know that last rap battle where Eminem's like, yeah, I did grow up from across the tracks. Yeah, my buddy did shoot himself. And he just shreds on all the nasty truths that he's been hiding from, defending, and protecting, right? And his competition had nothing. He drops the mic, he goes out, he's now free. When we get ourselves to that place where we no longer have anything to justify, protect, or defend, we are free. Free from the pain, free from the shame, free from the judgment. But then that's the critical piece that comes with it. When you realize that you no longer have to protect. I think of my wife and my kids in this example. When they come to dad for love, light, leadership, laughter, do they want to lay their head down on a metal chest piece of armor? No. So you still have to lower that armor with intention, because that soft front, that's what gives you the gentle strength to lead with conviction, to pull others along with you, and to allow transference and transformation to take place everywhere you go because of how present you're capable of being and how little you need to protect.
I love that in the very beginning of this episode, when I did the introduction, I spoke about how quickly we became friends and how deep our relationship got. And I shared, which I wasn't planning on sharing, the text message that you sent me. And I just want to ground this for the audience. Here are two men that have just recently met months back. They've had one or two phone conversations, video conversations, and not a lot of time together. And the one guy sends a text message to the other guy saying, man, we've just met, but I think about you all the time. Like, and it's not proportionate to the amount of time we've spent together. I really dig you, looking forward to getting to know you. And that is a beautiful conversation between two men. How many people would not have that conversation with anybody, let alone a stranger, let alone somebody that they've just met, somebody that they resonate with? And here's why I'm bringing this up at the close of our episode today, because through the entire episode today, so for the last 45 minutes or so, you have beautifully been sharing that you were not always open, you were not always vulnerable, and you became an unfolding of experience. Today, you're one of the most impactful coaches, speakers. You go into organizations, you bring love and energy and intentionality into everything that you do. It is truly all of what my life's work is around, which is why we have, connected so deeply so quickly, because I think we truly resonate on such a high level. And the reason I share this is you're demonstrating, just through how we started the episode today, some of the complementary things that have gone back and forth between us. And yet we're talking about somebody who wasn't that way, who now lives this way. And I use that to further emphasize the point that for you listening, if there is an area of your life where you are in pain, you are keeping yourself in that pain, and you are the only person capable of creating that relief. Brian touched on so many things that, good Lord, we could do like a 10-part series on this and still not unpack it all. Pain and emotion is the same thing, and that we alone are anchoring emotion. 91% of all illness in the human body is emotion related. And so we can release tremendous pain in the human body when we do the inner work. But we don't want to feel the emotional pain or the mental pain. So the body then produces the physical pain. And there's layers and layers of what he said that needs to be unpacked. And I know that you can grab all of the answers to everything that he just opened, because that's just a whole lot of can of worms. With Flipping the Lid podcast, following him on social media. I'm going to put his show links for everything, website, all of it into our show notes so you can follow him. But I just want to ground that this is what it looks like when somebody has done the work. You beautifully demonstrate what does it look like for somebody who is showing up as just a full version. And, admittedly, you said, I know I am still on the journey. I've been doing this work for so many years and still on the journey. I do want to ask a closing question. And I know we're at time, but I really think that the audience could benefit from a tool. You do speak a lot about embracing your pain and being able to use that to support you in where you're at. I know that somebody that's listening to this has put up an armor. Somebody is maybe going through something difficult right now. Somebody's maybe wronged them. They've been a victim, or there was a situation they couldn't control. And I would really love to know, how would you right now coach someone to embrace their pain to avoid their suffering?
Great question, and I will bring this together tightly and quickly because I do know that we're close to time. But the piece I want to say before I jump into the answer, because this is also what embracing pain to avoid suffering does for us. Though we are still on the journey, we spend a lot less time in the resistance, right? When I say that this will always happen in our lives, the thing I want to ground for people is I lived in shame and anger for months and years of my life. Wasted energy, wasted time, wasted health, wasted relationships, wasted all of it, right? Then it was weeks and months. Then it was days and weeks. Then it was hours and days. Then it was minutes and hours. And today, do I still get insecure? Do I still have shame? Do I still get triggered? Do I still get angry? Do I still have reactions? Of course I do. I'm human. But I spend minutes and moments in it 99% of the time today, which opens up all of the freedom for time, energy, money, resources, relationships to be able to direct it where I want. And this does come down to the choices that we make, right? To understand embracing pain to avoid suffering, there's a couple quick things I want to hit on. Okay. First and foremost is the nervous system. What are our nervous systems designed to do? To anticipate threat or risk and keep us safe against all costs. But again, our bodies almost always, and Rudi said it so eloquently, experience the world physically first, right? So 100 years ago, if I'd lost my arm, I'd be dead. That's not the world that we live in even 33 years ago, right? And so what are we reacting to most of the time? It's not a physical threat to our life or our safety in our bodies. It's almost always an intellectual or an emotional threat that we're reacting to in the same way. So if we understand the nervous system, I do believe that one of the greatest investments anyone can make is in nervous system regulation, because it's truly like your capacity or like your fuel tank. If you have nothing in it, You don't have the ability to regulate ground, move through things in moments. You will live in that reactive protective state because your nervous system knows no different. So part of this is acknowledging that this is a retraining of it. But the world tells us to reduce, eliminate, or avoid pain at all costs. And pain, we need to understand the definition. It's defined as short term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and alleviated once the direct cause is removed. Then what do we do as humans? We screw it up like everything else and we put adjectives in front of it, like acute and chronic. Now, acute maintains the definition, but chronic inherently changes it because it implies it's no longer short term and exists after the direct cause is removed. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is: suffering. We do not want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. But the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until you accept the current state of things, you cannot alter them. So, what does this concept look like? And there's way more behind this, but you'll understand it with these examples. We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with our partner or spouse to avoid the suffering of years of lost connection or, frankly, wanting out of a relationship and not knowing how. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation we'll never get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of losing all our other top talent because they were the greatest cancer in our culture. You can embrace the pain of doing the work to actually shine the light on the trash that you need to unpack and process to avoid the suffering of being stuck in the repeating patterns that you feel like you can never escape in your life. I do believe that we all have a choice, and this comes down to everything we do, and it's a deeper conversation than we have time for today. But at the end of the day, I do believe that you can choose the pain you want, or your suffering will choose you. I'd rather be the one in the driver's seat.
Man, that was so beautifully answered. I know that the audience is going to just want to know so much more about the genius that just flows so naturally through you. You have had a tremendous amount of life experience. Again, I want to just ground. We are going to put brianbogert.com in the show notes. We'll put your podcast in the show notes. We'll how to find you. I just think you're an incredible human being, but I love the way you're able to articulate really complex things in a really simple fashion that people can understand. I want the audience to walk away with one thing as I mean, they're going to walk away with many things, but one thing in close. I believe that pain is the period between awareness and decision. When we have the awareness of what has happened around us, and then we wait to decide how we're going to react, respond, what we're going to do. And there in itself is the pain. I don't mean the physical pain of a wound. I mean the pain that we live in all day, every single day, which you just so profoundly articulated that when something happens, if you're avoiding the conversation, you haven't made the decision, and I mean, there's a decision in itself to avoid it, but to not react to it, not to fix it, not to have the meaningful conversation, you're putting yourself in that state of pain. Not to pick up the book, not to learn, not to hire the coach, not to take action, not to do something different. That is living in the pain, and your life gets to be beautiful. I believe that we get to live with power, abundance, freedom, and joy. It is our birthright, but we have to do that inner work. Brian, you've clearly done the work. You've demonstrated it on the call today. I just want to say from my heart to yours, brother, I love you. I'm so proud of the man that you are. I'm proud of the journey that you've gone through. I'm proud of the father and the husband that you are. And I'm really excited to get to continue having these conversations. I know there'll be many, many, many more. From my heart to yours, man, thank you for joining me on the show.
I love you, man. Thank you very much for the opportunity and trusting me with your audience. And I reflect everything you just said to me back to you.
And to the InPowered Life community, it is always about you. Before Brian and I hit record, we actually said, because I ask everybody, how can I best serve you? And he said, man, let's just have a good conversation, ask interesting questions. And it's always about the impact for the audience. And that is always my intent with everything. When I wake up in the morning, I say a prayer about impacting every single life I come into contact with, whether it be through social media or somebody in a grocery store. I'm always wanting to leave every body, every room, every situation better than I found it. We hope that this conversation profoundly shifted something in you, that reminded you of the divinity that is you, that flows to you and flows through you, and that you alone gets to make the lemonade out of all of what life is serving you. I would love it if you could rate, review, share, subscribe to the podcast. If there was something that impacted you, reach out to Brian, let him know. I always know that when I receive messages from somebody about something that I shared, it means the world to us to hear it. And I know that it would mean the world to him as well. From me to you, I love you, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Empowered Life podcast.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. And we would love your support in leaving us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Make sure to check the show notes for more information on how you can find us online and on Instagram. Now go create an amazing day for yourself, and we'll see you again soon.